A tense morning unfolded outside the federal courthouse in New York. The air was thick with tension, and a divided crowd gathered, voices clashing, some shouting in support of Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, others demanding her removal. Inside the chilly courtroom, AOC sat silently in the defendant's chair, her back straight but her hands tightly clasped, betraying the immense pressure she was under. This wasn't just another political battle. It was a legal fight that could determine her future. The statement that triggered this storm, "Lay a finger on them, we are going to have a problem," was now a key piece of evidence in a high-stakes case. At the prosecution table sat Tom Homan, the former acting ICE director, whom AOC had sharply criticized. Today, he wasn't just a witness. He was the symbol of law and order, challenging what he viewed as dangerous rhetoric. AOC's legal team, led by the ACLU's Elena Martinez, whispered final strategies. They all understood the stakes. A single misstep could cost AOC her congressional seat, her career, and her voice. The sound of the judge's gavel rang through the courtroom like a thunderclap. All eyes turned to AOC. The trial had officially begun, and so had the battle for her political life. Prosecutor James Whitaker stood, tall and imposing in his crisp black suit. His voice was sharp, every word calculated to pierce AOC's defense. He painted a picture of a congresswoman who had crossed legal lines, whose passionate rhetoric had morphed into incitement and obstruction. Representative Ocasio-Cortez did not simply exercise her right to free speech, he declared. She issued a threat, and she undermined law enforcement at a national level. He played a clip of AOC's voice, fierce, resolute, warning ICE not to harm members of Congress. Then he let the words linger in the air. "That's not a warning," he said. "That's a threat." He cited federal criminal codes and pointed to her social media posts, painting her as someone who encouraged immigrants to defy federal authority. The prosecution claimed that her actions didn't just express opposition, they incited lawlessness. Whitaker also presented documentation from ICE detailing arrests of dangerous gang members, work he credited to Homan and his team. He juxtaposed that with AOC's defiant statements, calling it congressional oversight disguised as chaos. Throughout, AOC sat still, her pen trembling slightly in her hand, her lawyer scribbling notes furiously beside her. When Whitaker turned his attack toward ICE oversight workshops organized by AOC, Martinez objected, but the judge sided with the prosecution. The crowd in the courtroom murmured. Some clapped while others jeered. Homan watched silently, expression cold and unreadable. He wasn't speaking yet, but his presence loomed large. Whitaker concluded by asking the court to refer AOC to the House Ethics Committee, warning that her actions warranted potential expulsion. The courtroom exploded in noise before the judge called for order again. AOC's composure cracked slightly. She realized just how effectively the prosecution had framed her as a destabilizing force. Martinez stood to counter Whitaker's fierce opening. Her approach was steady, legalistic, and grounded in constitutional rights. She argued that AOC's statements fell squarely within the protections of the First Amendment. Citing precedent, she emphasized that political rhetoric, even passionate, forceful rhetoric, was not the same as a criminal threat. She referenced court cases like Watts versus United States and framed AOC's behavior as that of a concerned representative, not a criminal instigator. But her delivery lacked Whitaker's fire. While legally sound, her arguments didn't stir the room. Even some of AOC's supporters sat stiffly, their eyes fixed on the prosecutor's table. Martinez turned the focus on ICE's controversial history, presenting reports from human rights groups about abusive practices at detention centers. Shizao described AOC's statements as necessary pushback against systemic injustice, not sabotage. But her attempt to humanize AOC didn't land as powerfully as needed. Her voice trembled slightly as she tried to defend AOC's workshops aimed at educating immigrants about their rights, calling them acts of protection, not obstruction. Still, she failed to adequately discredit the prosecution's central narrative. Whitaker smirked. Homan sat motionless, watching it all unfold like a chessboard already tilting in his favor. As Martinez cited another report on ICE misconduct, the judge ruled it irrelevant. The prosecution's strategy, to keep the focus narrow and on AOC's words, was succeeding. AOC leaned to whisper to her attorney, urging her to fight back harder. Martinez tried to ramp up, accusing the Trump administration of weaponizing the case against AOC. But it felt reactive. Her argument about political retaliation fell flat. She lacked the damning evidence to back it up. The defense's rebuttal was faltering and the courtroom could feel it. Homan nodded slightly to Whitaker, signaling quiet satisfaction. With the defense on the back foot, the prosecution called its key witness. Tom Homan took the stand. In his gray suit, he cut a commanding figure, a man who'd built his identity on law enforcement and border security. His voice was even, unwavering. He spoke of 3 decades of service, of gang busts, drug seizures, and dangerous missions. And then, calmly but firmly, he turned his attention to AOC. Her words, he said, weren't just political statements. They endangered officers and stoked hatred. "I've dealt with cartels and threats," he said, "but I've never seen a U.S. lawmaker call me a coward and incite hostility against ICE." The courtroom was silent. Whitaker walked Homan through AOC's controversial posts and her alleged encouragement of immigrants to resist ICE. When asked if he felt threatened, Homan paused, then replied, "Not for myself, but for my agents." Her words created a hostile environment. The prosecutor rested his case with that message. AOC's rhetoric was dangerous, irresponsible, and worthy of serious consequences. AOC clenched her fists under the table. She knew the moment she stepped into the witness box, it would all be on her to flip the script. Her lawyer tried to signal reassurance, but AOC's confidence was shaken. The courtroom had already heard from a seasoned enforcer of the law. Now, it would hear from a progressive firebrand, whose future was on the line. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez rose from her seat in a crisp navy blazer, adjusting the microphone at the witness stand. Her voice was steady at first, but the strain was visible in her eyes. Everyone in the courtroom watched, waiting to see if she could turn the tide after Tom Homan's authoritative testimony. Her lead attorney, Elena Martinez, gave a small nod, silently urging her forward. AOC's fate now rested not only in the judge's hands, but in how the public would perceive her, raw, vulnerable, and under fire. Martinez opened carefully. "Representative Ocasio-Cortez," she began, "can you explain the context of your statement regarding ICE and what you meant when you said there will be a problem?" AOC leaned forward, her voice clear but not yet forceful. "It was not a threat. It was a call for accountability," she said. "I meant that the public would respond, through peaceful protest, civic engagement, and by voting. That's how democracies work." As she spoke, her confidence grew. ICE was acting beyond its boundaries, detaining people unjustly. I was elected to speak out against that. A few quiet murmurs of support emerged from the gallery, but Judge Grayson's gavel quickly hushed them. Martinez then shifted to AOC's role as a representative. "What have you done to advocate for your constituents?" AOC answered with clarity and growing conviction. "I've visited detention centers. I've heard the cries of children separated from their families. My duty is to protect my community, not to stay silent when I see injustice." Her voice cracked slightly, but she held her composure. "My workshops weren't teaching people how to break the law. They were about knowing their rights, knowing how to ask for a lawyer, how to protect themselves under the Constitution." Martinez smiled briefly, hoping this show of resolve would help. But the room remained cool, reserved, still holding onto the prosecution's earlier dominance. Then it was James Whitaker's turn. The prosecutor stood, slowly approaching the witness stand with a subtle smirk. "Representative Ocasio-Cortez," he said softly, You say your words weren't threats. So why did you choose the phrase, "we're going to have a problem"? Why use language that could so easily be misinterpreted? AOC responded firmly. It was political speech. It wasn't aimed at individuals. It was about standing up to abuse of power. Whitaker played the video again, AOC's voice ringing out in anger, and let it echo in the silence. Do you see now how someone in law enforcement might hear that and feel targeted? He asked. Before AOC could fully answer, Whitaker cut in. Are you aware that after this speech, ICE officers were attacked during protests in New York? AOC's breath caught. I don't support violence, she replied. But I can't control everyone's reaction to my words. I only meant to advocate for justice. Whitaker didn't back down. You also called Mr. Homan a coward on social media. Do you think that's the behavior of a responsible congresswoman? AOC bristled. I said that because he goes after the vulnerable while ignoring systemic abuse. That's not cowardice to me. It's injustice. Her words landed hard, but Whitaker pressed on, unfazed. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a near whisper. So when you held workshops teaching undocumented immigrants how to avoid ICE, were you obstructing federal law? AOC's eyes flared. I was teaching them their rights under the law. That's not obstruction. It's empowerment. But the courtroom sensed her frustration rising. Whitaker leaned in, voice sharp. You don't believe your words incited hostility? Toward law enforcement. AOC paused, chest rising. You're twisting everything. ICE isn't untouchable. They operate with power, and power must be held accountable. The pressure finally cracked her composure. She stood up suddenly, pointing at Whitaker. ICE detains children in cages, and Homan is the architect of that cruelty. You call me dangerous? I've spent my career trying to protect people like those children. The courtroom burst into chaos, shouting from both sides, gasps from the audience. Judge Grayson slammed his gavel repeatedly. Representative Ocasio-Cortez, sit down. One more outburst, and I'll hold you in contempt. Martinez tugged AOC back to her seat, whispering, Alex, don't give them what they want. But AOC's chest heaved, and her face was flushed red. Tom Homan sat at the prosecution's table, arms crossed, wearing a look of quiet triumph. Whitaker, unfazed by the eruption, turned to the judge. Your Honor, this behavior only proves what we've argued all along, that Representative Ocasio-Cortez acts with disregard for the law, for order, and even for this courtroom. He returned to his seat, leaving AOC in a spotlight of scrutiny. Cameras caught her every expression. Some supporters bowed their heads. Conservative commentators outside were already drafting headlines. The judge called for a brief recess, but the damage had been done. Elena Martinez buried her face in her hands. AOC sat motionless, her eyes wide with the realization that she had just handed her opponents the emotional evidence they lacked. When court resumed, Whitaker called a surprise witness. ICE agent Daniel Rivera. The room rippled with tension. AOC whispered to Martinez, Who is that? Martinez shook her head. This wasn't someone they had prepared for. Rivera took the stand, dressed in full ICE uniform. Whitaker questioned him carefully, setting the scene of a protest outside the Delaney Hall Detention Center where AOC had once spoken. What happened after Representative Ocasio-Cortez's remarks? Rivera's voice was grim. The crowd turned hostile. Bottles were thrown. Agents were threatened. Her words gave them the push to escalate. The courtroom murmured again. More people glancing toward AOC with skepticism. Martinez cross-examined, but Rivera held firm. Were you coached by Mr. Homan or anyone else? She asked. No, Rivera said. I'm here to tell the truth. Her words made our job dangerous. Martinez tried to pivot, questioning ICE's own record of abuse, but the judge shut her down again. Stay on topic, counselor, he ordered. AOC sat silently, her hand clenched into a fist on her lap. She felt the walls closing in. The media was already shaping the narrative. Her courtroom explosion would go viral. Rivera's testimony would be viewed as proof she endangered lives. And Homan? He'd become the face of law and order. When the judge returned for the verdict, tension flooded the room. On the charge of threatening violence, this court finds insufficient evidence for conviction, he began. AOC exhaled. But then came the blow. However, the court finds Representative Ocasio-Cortez guilty of obstructing law enforcement. A fine of $50,000 is imposed. This court refers the matter to the House Ethics Committee for further review. Gasps filled the room. AOC dropped her gaze. The ethics investigation could lead to expulsion. Homan stood and shook Whitaker's hand, his expression firm but victorious. Outside, conservative media erupted. On social media, Homan was hailed as a hero. President Trump posted, "Great job, Tom Homan. AOC has no place in Congress." AOC faced the press, voice steady but drained. "I will continue to fight for justice and for my community," she said. But the fire in her words didn't erase the storm around her. In her office that night, she sat alone, scrolling through media headlines, memes mocking her outburst, polls predicting political downfall. She whispered to herself, "I lost control." Meanwhile, Homan stood on a Fox News set, calm and proud. "This wasn't just about me," he said. "It was about showing that no one is above the law." The host nodded. The audience applauded. And in that moment, Homan didn't just win a court case. He claimed a political victory that echoed far beyond the courtroom. The battle between passion and discipline, emotion and strategy had played out in full public view. And for now, Tom Homan had won.